Hi everyone. For today's Lost Icons of Western Sydney, we're going to be looking at a grand mansion whose memory has slipped through the mists of time. However, one fragment of this once grand mansion remains, which we will visit shortly. But first, let's take a look at this house. It is Flushcombe Turrets. This grand mansion was actually the second built on a tremendous allotment of land, 2,000 acres. The land originally belonged to the Darug people, and in 1823 this particular portion was allocated to Captain Robert Lethbridge as a reward for his valiant duties in saving the lives of his passengers and crew when their ship sank, and then hiking for 6 days until rescue. Not only did he save his passengers and crew, but he also saved the all-important mail. And so as a gratitude, he was given a tremendous plot of land, 2,000 acres. And as the decades would roll on, this tremendous allotment would gradually be subdivided until it would no longer exist. Captain Lethbridge would ultimately build a house called Flushcombe, and at the time it was a substantial structure. We do know from some newspaper accounts that its dining hall was about 7 meters long, or 34 feet. However, to posterity's tragedy, we have no plans, we have no sketches. At the moment, nothing exists of this original house. And as subdivisions would continuously happen, we can surmise that the house remained occupied in some form or another from 1823 right through to at least the mid-1880s. This tremendous plot of land would continuously be subdivided, and ultimately another block nearby would be bought by William Campbell. William Campbell was a very successful businessman and would ultimately use his tremendous acreage for farming, for having a tremendous goldfish pond, and for using his furniture store to advertise some of his agricultural products, such as jams, which were actually on display at the Australian Imperial Exhibition. William Campbell bought this plot of land in 1875, and in the early 1880s we do have records of tenders for a substantial turreted mansion to be built on this site. And this subsequent house, which is the image that we see up here, became known as the Flushcombe Turrets. Sadly, this is the only photo we have of this house. This was taken in 1905, and actually at the time this house was abandoned, had been empty for a few years. Through the wonders of modern software technology, we can recreate how it would have looked in its heyday, and you will see some of these up here as I talk. And I do want to preface it, the historian in me must declare that while there is no record of what the color of the balconies were, I've produced a selection of different color schemes based on popular colors used during the Victorian era. Of course, if anyone locates definitive information of what color they were, I would love to know. This substantial manor house dominated the hill on which it was situated. And for a couple of years, it was a thriving agricultural business, and this was the manor house on which Campbell and his family lived. And from the accounts that we have, he particularly loved to feed his rather large goldfish pond. However, times were changing, and as the 1890s went through into the 1900s and a new century dawned, more subdivisions caused the nature of the surrounding area to change from large landed estates to smaller farms and even smaller farms. So it got to a point where this grand house was an anomaly, just surrounded by smaller and smaller farms. And this could be one of the reasons why it reached a point where it was no longer inhabited. There are accounts of a renovation. We don't know whether the renovation was completed in full. However, in 1909, 4 years after the only photo of Flushcombe Turrets was taken, the house burnt down. Its ruins remained standing for a few more years before it was finally knocked down and the land was used as a dairy farm, and then further subdivisions would ultimately completely change the character of the surrounding area. However, while the houses, original Flushcombe and this second Flushcombe Turrets, are long gone, we do have a few segments that we can actually touch and relate to the original house. And so we are going to go on location. Okay, this is all that's left of Flushcombe Turrets. It's sitting here in a park, which isn't the original location. We're going to go and check out the original location shortly. But this is all that's left of the once grand mansion. The concrete gates represent the turrets of the name Flushcombe Turrets. And thanks to one responsible citizen, they were saved from dumping and brought here. A little worse for wear, however, they still stand here as a fitting memorial to this once grand mansion that has given this major artery of Flushcombe Road its name. As you saw, only these two gateposts remain. Originally, from this photo, 4 gateposts were placed in front of Christ Church. This is the second of the Christ Churches in Blacktown. It is worth noting that William Campbell was a substantial donor to the first Christ Church, and so it does make sense that perhaps one of his children donated these gateposts for the second church when it was built as a form of continuity or remembrance. 2 were dumped, and the remaining 2 have now been placed in the reserve. Christ Church itself has long since been deconsecrated and is now an arts centre, and it is due for redevelopment, which in all intents and purposes probably means demolition. The location of the actual house of Flushcombe Turrets was converted eventually to a parkland, and we will now go back on location to have a look at what that looks like now. You can see this gentle rise as per the historical photo. Once upon a time, this site was dominated by the Flushcombe Turrets house. Now, what used to be farmland is suburbs upon suburbs with multiple streets and roads, and aside from the 2 gates, all that basically there is to remember of the house is Flushcombe Road, which is essentially in front of us, which is the main artery within Western Sydney, well, one of the suburbs of Western Sydney. It is so sad that these 2 houses that once dominated the local area and the community are now gone, and we just have 2 gateposts to remember these houses by. This video is just a brief introduction into the history of Flushcombe and Flushcombe Turrets. I am indebted to an award-winning local history essay by Lyn and Les Tod, who have done exceptional work in producing what we know about the history of these houses. A link is down below for you to freely access and download the PDF and read the full detailed history of the property and the going-ons of these two houses, which I highly recommend. Western Sydney has changed completely. It has gone from landed estates to farmland to burgeoning suburbia, and is now again in a state of flux as suburbs give way to apartments and modern CBDs. And this is just one example of the many changes that are happening here. If there are any other lost houses or lost manors that you would like to learn more about, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear about more lost houses.